Ladies and gentlemen, Annabel Crabb.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, if you had anything at all to do with it, for this fantastic display to my left. I have often found that giant floral displays with which I have co-occupied a speaking stage very rarely have enough root crop in them, and this is spectacular, so thank you for that. And look, thank you, Sydney Living Museums, for programming the festival of my dreams, really. You do not need to spend 1 second convincing me how much food can tell us about how other people live, how other people work, and about what they love. And I have often thought that in my own field of work, as a political journalist, that you can learn so much more about politicians by having dinner with them. And the ABC, of course, in a moment of horrendous administrative inattention, allowed me to make Kitchen Cabinet, which sneakily fulfilled another life dream of mine, which is being paid to cook and eat. That's worked out very nicely. I have now visited 20 politicians in the course of making that program, and I always learn something. Sometimes it's something large, and sometimes it's something small. Julie Bishop, for instance, recently sworn in among a narrow field of fillies as our first female foreign minister, which is not an inconsiderable achievement. Now, she likes a nice detailed mise en place, I discovered when I went to her house, and found that she had an unchopped onion in its own tiny glass bowl, preparatory to making a risotto with it. She also once baked dozens and dozens of cupcakes when she was about 10 in order to beat all the other brownies to the baking badge, which I think should tell you something. Now, Bronwyn Bishop, on the other hand, has the hugest and most impeccably polished collection of silverware I have ever seen, although upstairs challenges her mantle slightly. Look, there was barely enough room for food on the table when I ate at her house. She polishes it all herself by hand. She also does her own hair work, as I discovered. No other living person has touched that hair since 1976. All her words, extraordinary. Anyway, Kevin Rudd, with whom I had a high tea during the election campaign, still has his late mother's handwritten cookbook, which is this incredibly beautiful thing. There's a couple of them upstairs as well. They're excellent. There is nothing like a surviving cookbook to tell you about the lives and loves of its proprietor. But hers is this lovely thing full of scribbles and lots of chocolate splodges on the page that Kevin's chocolate slice lives on, lots of flapping out bits of Women's Weekly, and hilariously evocative recipes like the one for mock chicken, which is this sort of Depression-era loaf of horror made from cooked macaroni and eggs and breadcrumbs and peanut butter, all crammed into a loaf tin and sliced to serve. Lovely. Since he filmed Kitchen Cabinet with us, Malcolm Turnbull has told me that he suspects the Turnbull method of getting pomegranate seeds out of pomegranates without squirting your shirt might be his best received and most popular contribution to public life. I'm sure that's not true. Nigel Scullion, who's now the Cabinet Minister for Indigenous Affairs, spent the day before our crew's arrival in Darwin to dine with him, gunning down everything in sight. There's no kinder way of putting it. I said to him, "Aren't these things protected, Nigel?" as I nervously contemplated his platter of mango-marinated magpie goose breast. I didn't have to eat it because I don't eat meat, but the whole crew had to have some after about 30,000 flies had helped themselves. Anyway, "Aren't these protected, Nigel?" I asked him nervously. "Not against shotgun pellets, in my experience," came his cheery response. Oh, I learned a lot about him. I did. Penny Wong, on the other hand, her love of food comes so strongly from her sense of family and belonging. She lost her brother Toby when he was only young, and he was training as a chef, and it's by cooking the dishes that he loved that she keeps him alive in her home and to her own daughter. I think that if you ask someone, how did you learn to cook? What you often hear in response is a life story. And I love hearing those stories. And what this thing upstairs, this exhibition, which is entrancing and fabulous, Eat Your History, a shared table, actually demonstrates is that it works for cities as well, which is quite spectacular. I think food pushes its way in everywhere. For instance, I love election day for obvious reasons. I think watching a people vote in freedom is one of the greatest privileges in the world. But also because election day cake stalls are just the best thing ever. So my local one had somebody who had brought along dozens of cakes which had been individually iced and then spiked with individual heads of politicians, so you could buy whomever it was that there were even Clive Palmer ones, even though obviously, unless you were highly corrupt, you couldn't vote for Clive directly in New South Wales. My colleague Leigh Sales, who was a weapons-grade baker, apart from her other very obvious skills, voted by pre-poll before election day, but confessed to me last week that she actually visited 2 polling booths on election day anyway, 100% just for the baking. And may I never forget the fabulous person on Twitter who constructed a cake replica of the House of Representatives in real time as Anthony Green called the seats that night, icing them as they were called: Coalition, Labor, Independent, arranging them into a horseshoe shape. Strange and fabulous person. Now, Sydney today is such a great place to investigate the food that makes a nation tick. I mean, I can barely visit a grocery store or go to my fantastic local Addison Road markets without discovering a new ingredient, a new enthusiast, or variety of obscure vegetable. I was about to say obscene vegetable, and there's no such thing. Beyond that, of course, there's this incredible variety of cuisines, cooking techniques, and dining fashions and styles from every part of the world that we now, of course, take for granted in the most urbane of fashions. On one level, food is a subsistence necessity, and we should never, even in a festival of plenty like this one, forget how many people don't have enough of it. But it's the inventiveness at either end of the feast and famine spectrum that really tells us something about what boundlessly imaginative beings we carbon-based life forms can be. Which came first, Kevin Rudd's mum's mock chicken or Peter Gilmore's snow egg? I think they both display inventiveness in differing circumstances, and that's what makes food a fascinating way of eliciting life's great stories. Now, I've had the benefit of a sneaky tour from Jackie Newling and Scott Hill. Jackie Newling, she's a colonial gastronomer, if you please. Now, that is the business card that I want. I'm scrapping all plans, and I plan to become a colonial gastronomer immediately. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to get it done. And halfway through the exhibition upstairs, you will see approximately 5-minute video, which I very much recommend that you stick around and watch, of Jackie making jelly from calves' feet. Scratch, yeah. Obviously, it's a happy ending for the jelly consumers, less happy for the cows, who I assume are being sensitively retrained somewhere to live without feet. But anyway. The exhibition begins at First Government House, on the foundations of which, of course, we now stand, and charts the start of cross-cultural exchange between Sydney's Aboriginal population and the new colony. We see the first use of Indigenous ingredients, such as native sarsaparilla used as tea to supplement those brought from the old world. And this whole resourcefulness is a running theme throughout Sydney's relationship with food. And those early colonists were terribly adventurous. Native animals, birds, seafood, reptiles, nobody was safe from the cooking pot. When the fertile farming land opened up west of Sydney, those native foods lost their appeal for a while and then popped up again in the 1870s and 80s with such antipodean tourist puzzling delights as wallaby tail stew and kangaroo curries. Then we move on through some other of the fascinating properties that are in the portfolio. Elizabeth Farm, we see the colony leaving behind food scarcity with this episode of plenty. Homegrown wheat, maize, sheep, cows, pigs, almonds, pear and apple becoming increasingly abundant. Peaches too, between 1795 and 1830. If you haven't tried Young Henry's peach brew, on a glass of which I'm now operating, I'd really recommend that you do. It's pretty good stuff. At Elizabeth Bay House and its incredible dining room, which is the next setting, you see an example of a winter feast circa about 1859, featured 33 dishes served over 3 courses, which exemplified society dining at its most spectacular, and left even the ubiquitous modern degustation menu looking a bit on the skimpy side. Do have a look at that menu because it's fabulous, and just as a human word of warning, you will want to steal the teacups, and no, you're not allowed to because I already tried. Vaucluse House next, and we enter this upstairs, downstairs world of household staff between the 1830s and 1860. What did the butler see? Did they spit in the food? I would have. What did a tinker do? All your questions answered. Moving on to 1870 to 1900, you see the Australian identity begin to emerge properly at Rouse Hill House and Farm. Formal dining still had its place, but people also decamped to the outdoors. Dining in summer houses and picnicking were favourite activities in this colony as Sydney-siders took advantage of the temperate climate. So make sure you check out, when you visit the world of Bessie Rouse and her daughters, their fabulous cook, Kate Joyce, who is pictured and described, and she sounds like quite a terrifying woman. Marugal is the next stop, with the hospitality of the women of Marugal and their monthly at-homes on display, with people from around Nowra calling in for afternoon tea, music, poetry recitals. Another heavy teacup warning here, I'm afraid. There's some extremely good crockery, again, not available to any of us, apparently. Then we go to Susanna Place, which is another property in the portfolio, a very different sort of feel. This is where householders made do, and in the rocks between 1910 and the 1940s, just absolutely littered with determinedly thrifty menus of the mock chicken variety, brightened out by what we might now call comfort food, homely stews, and of course sago puddings. Now, all good journeys need to come to an end, and this exhibition has a spectacular end at the incredible 1950s home of Rose Seidler House. It's just a house in which I would like to live and plan to if I can, swing something appropriate at an appropriate time. The atomic age, how much we owe that age. Go and roll around in it. Look, it's these fantastic stories that you'll have a breath of upstairs that are interwoven in that long and fascinating journey from 1788 to the 1950s that really make this exhibition magic. And for those of you who have been lucky to visit all of these homes, well, good on you. You'll be reminded of them upstairs. But for someone like me who hasn't been to all of them, it's an incredibly tantalising reminder that I need to get there ASAP. And anyone with a passion for food and cooking or dining will find so much to delight in this wonderful exhibition, and in the accompanying program, a spectacular program of feasts and talks and tours and tastes and kids event. And as you skim through the program, you will, like me, immediately commence plotting to work out how much you can cram in. Can I tip the kids out with Miss Manners at Rouse Hill Farm while I sneak off to hear David Serekis talk about baklava? This is a man who united the concepts of pork belly and baklava in the one dish. I mean, he's quite an extraordinary fella. Ladies and gentlemen, you can and you should. And you will love every cotton-picking minute of it. On that note, it's now my very great pleasure too, with everything I can possibly offer by way of officialdom, which is not much, but what I lack in pomp, I make up for with enthusiasm. Launch Sydney Living Museum's Food and Eat Your History, a Shared Table exhibition. Hooray for that! And thank you for coming.